Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first ever free online webinar. And there's going to be more, we promise you that. This is brought to you, of course, by the Ateneo Center for English Language Teaching, or ACELT. I'm Cheche Suarez, your moderator facilitator for today. So this webinar on decolonizing English language teaching and learning, educators' voices, is a sweet and sumptuous fruit of the seed which we planted in June to August of this year. SEED, or the Sociolinguistics and English Education, was the course that brought this webinar to life. Para sa mga plantito at plantita na nakaka-relate, para kaming gardeners ni Dr. Tupas or Wani, at nagtanim kami ng seeds of ideas in social linguistics na lumago sa tulong ng iba pang mga gardeners in the person of our seed students. And 3 of them are here today to share with us the fruits of their own seeds. So through ACELT, Dr. Tupas and I put this webinar together to encourage us, educators, researchers, scholars, who plant different kinds of seeds, well, literally and metaphorically, to engage in a conversation that allows us to rethink and reflect on our experiences in the English language classrooms, both in the basic education and tertiary levels. We hope that through our discussions this afternoon, we will be able to help you grow the seeds you've been planting in your own backyards. So before we proceed, allow me to thank all of you for choosing to be here today. We have more than 200 participants and we're waiting for more. Maraming salamat po for joining us today. So to start, I'd like to introduce to you our first speaker. Dr. Wani Tupas hails from Aklan, but currently lives with his family in London, UK. He teaches at the Department of Culture, Communication and Media, Institute of Education, University College London. He has taught in the University of the Philippines in Diliman, National University of Singapore, and the National Institute of Education, Singapore. He researches on unequal Englishes, inequalities of multilingualism, and the geopolitics of knowledge production. In this introductory talk, Ruani will draw on the music video Kasmala of the multilingual group Alamat, which you actually had a chance to watch while waiting before we began today. Ruani will discuss decolonization as it is mobilized in English language teaching, highlighting both the possibilities and problems it generates for the field. It argues that decolonizing ELT is necessary to change or transform harmful practices in the classroom. But this political project should be viewed as linked with other social projects of transformation beyond the literal confines of the classroom. So everyone, Dr. Ruani Tupas.
Maraming salamat, Cheche. Thank you very much. To the more than 200 so far in this webinar, welcome and thank you very much for choosing to be with us today. I know we have so many choices now in the midst of so many things going on, and it's great to see all of you here. It's good morning, may adlaw, that's Aklanon. That's good morning in Aklanon because I am speaking from London at the moment. As you can see, I've actually just seen my background. There are some stuff there, like an alcohol. So we live in the times. So that's what you call unedited. I just found it. Okay, so anyway, I only have about 20 minutes, and I'm here basically just to frame some of the issues that will be surfaced later on. And I think one of the things that, one of the reasons why I think this is something very important is because the term decolonization in the field of applied linguistics and social linguistics, and I'm sorry to say, has become fashionable, right? And I think it's about, while I am centrally engaged in these issues myself, I think it's also important, first and foremost, to listen to a variety of voices in the field. And that's the reason why we framed this webinar as, educators' voices, because in my own reading of the literature, or at least the most recent literature on decolonizing practices and ideologies in the field, very little can be heard from the voices on the ground, teachers, for example, even parents, for example. And I think it's important. It's important to realize this, because these are voices that complicate our understanding of decolonization as a term. And another thing also is, I'm going to say this, how I'm supposed to end my talk, and that is the fact that decolonization indeed shouldn't really be something that we need to engage ourselves in because this is something fashionable, or it's something that should be part of life. In fact, if you look at the literature, even just in the context of the Philippines, questions and issues of decolonization have been around for many decades, since the 1950s and 60s, right? There have already been calls, to transform society in so many ways, and in so many with so many strategies. So this is really nothing new. What I hope to accomplish here, therefore, is while we start centrally engaged in these issues in the classroom, that these issues are not confined to the classroom, that we are not engaged in this because we are educators and teachers. We are engaged in this because we are users of language, because we are Filipinos, because we are, in a sense, quote unquote, global citizens. I think that is something that we need to bear in mind. All right. So let me share. How do I share? Here it is. So let me now share my slides. And I think the reason why okay. Can you see my slides now, Chet?
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right. So I'll talk about confronting our beliefs and our practices in the classroom, and these beliefs and practices are, to a large extent, have colonial beginnings, and are embedded in colonial discourses and practices as well. Um, if you've seen, if you watch Kasmala of Alamat, for those of you who probably have listened to some of my talks, I draw on popular culture to be able to talk about issues in the field, because I think this is, to me, one way to connect and link with, current practices and goings on, for example, in social media, to get everyone involved in talking about issues such as decolonization, post-colonialism, and so on and so forth. And Kasmala of Alamat, and Alamat as a group, is one group that I have been following for quite some time now, because of its very explicit and coherent way of addressing issues of Filipino identity, for example, of using music, for example, by going back to the use of Philippine languages, local cultures, and histories. And in this music video, you may, if you haven't seen it yet, you may find time to hopefully find time to get to it later on. The Kasmala basically talks about how images, practices that we are engaged in now are very much linked back to practices of colonialism in the past, right? Basically that. How do I hope I can. Yes, there is it. So as you can see here, you have one image in the in the music video of RG, who is actually Waray, in a sense, somehow dancing with someone in complete white, attire, basically. And here, this is actually in reference to a particular picture back in good old times of U.S. colonialism in the Philippines. whereby discourses of education were very much embedded in discourses of tutelage, basically, or colonial tutelage, that it is, the colonizers who brought enlightenment to the Philippines and Filipinos, and because of that, we need to embrace, benevolent assimilation. We need to embrace American colonialism. Of course, this is all historically really false, precisely because prior to that, Filipinos were already engaged in cosmopolitan conversations, around the world. Our intellectual scholars were already engaging with scholars from other parts of the world, in Spanish, in English, in Japanese, in German, in so many ways. And yet, because of these colonial discourses, it somehow has taught us, wrongly, of course, the idea that we became enlightened, we became not background, but progressive, precisely because of education. Now, what this actually tells us, all right, is this the whole difference. I'm saying this now quite in a very straightforward way, that what Kasmala, the music video, is actually showing us are images of coloniality, right? Which are very much related back or linked back to images of colonialism. This is just to keep us, engaged with, these two terms, because one of the things that we usually hear is that, the Americans already left. I mean, it's definitely yes, all right. Colonialism as a political, direct rule over, let's say, a country, a nation, is a thing of the past. But coloniality, all right, perpetuates exactly what has happened in the past. So that's the kind of juxtaposition that I need us to bear in mind. So, it's basically coloniality. The conditions are still present, in other words, in our own practices. The same thing with Alas, being scrubbed here by an image of Alas, who is Bisaya from Davao, all right, being scrubbed here, basically whitened. And you have here, again, in reference to another set of discourses in the past, whereby it says here that, it says the President McKinley saying basically, "Oh, you dirty boy." It's a reference to the idea of a colonial perspective on Filipinos, basically, that their color and who they are and their identity need to be whitewashed. You need to be washed and scrubbed in order for them to be, a better person, more enlightened, and so on and so forth. So, it's the idea that, certain color and certain identity is dirty, all right, and needs to be cleaned, and so on. And it's the same thing again. So you have these ideas about, inferiority, in the way we speak, for example, in the way we speak English. The idea that we're talking to someone in front of us, automatically is judged as superior because of, let's say, the kind of English that he or she speaks, right? And here it relates back, it links back, this kind of thinking, this kind of discourses to many decades of colonial education. The same thing with Mo, who's from Zambales, basically, but also is actually half American, Black American, and half Filipino. And as you can see here, you have, gradations of, an image of, gradations of intelligence, which again link back, to these varying grades of intelligence that we were all taught, about our, past generations were taught about, from right to left, for example, these actually showcases, gradations of intelligence. So meron talagang scales of intelligence based on who you are, based on the color of your skin, based on the features of your skin and your body, for example. And we may not admit it. That's why I said we need to confront these things, because these are embedded, in our own perceptions of other people, and our own perceptions of ourselves as well. Okay, and of course here's Ateneo, all right, from Kalinga, and who sings in Ilocano in Kasmala, all right, in bondage. Basically, it's a very present day contemporary image of, as a reference to, exhibitions, Philippine exhibitions in the past. If those of you who are not aware of our Philippine history, there were groups of Filipinos that were sent to St. Louis and other parts of in the United States to become live exhibits of what backward people were like. And this is one image of one very small girl, right, who were basically nakagapos, right, in bondage, right, and people around them, her, watched them, so became a center of, in a sense, basically of attention, or of exoticism, so to speak. Just to keep all of that together, so what I'm saying is that these practices and ideologies that were carry over basically represent conditions of coloniality, can tell us something about the coloniality of English language teaching and learning. And here's one example of that I can give you. In my own archival work, for example, this is one just in the midst of many. I think I've shared it in a few talks before. English ousts dialects from the Philippines. So I think yung unang tanong natin dyan is ousts talaga, ousts from the classroom. But I think oust here is, to me, quite strategic in a sense, although subtly strategic for that matter, because oust basically is talking about forcible. There's just a forcible ousting, of the Philippine dialects from the classroom. But then, what's another underlying message that is given to us here is that the Philippine languages are not languages; they are dialects. All right. So there is a juxtaposition here that basically tells us that English is a language, but the rest of the Philippine languages are dialects. Now, I mentioned this precisely because even now in the education system, we keep on teaching our students that the Philippine languages are dialects. That's completely wrong, right? Because our languages are of equal value with all other languages in the world. But why is it that we keep on telling people that my Aklanon, I speak Aklanon, I speak Hiligaynon, for example, Cebuano or Ilocano, my wife's language as well, and more than 100 languages. Why do we keep on telling ourselves, our fellow teachers, our children, our students, that these are dialects, right? It's wrong. These are all Philippine languages. And the reason why I keep on emphasizing this is because of the low valuing of our Philippine languages when we refer to them as dialects. Kaya hindi binibigyan ng halaga, because not given importance, precisely because of the way they were framed already. And I'm showing this example to you because this framing was not just simply taught to you or given to us last week or last month. It has been there for generations. It's already there. English is a language, Philippine languages are dialects. So there is like a hierarchy of languages that colonialism actually put in place, so that we would start, devaluing our own languages and privileging only one language, which is the language of education. So if there's one thing that we think about now in terms of our attitude towards English and our attitude towards the Philippine languages, let's think. These are colonial conditions, these are practices and ideologies of coloniality. So what are some of these that I think I won't talk about these in detail, because these will definitely, come in so many ways in the talks, the wonderful and brilliant talks of our speakers later on. But some of these things, for example, the coloniality of language beliefs. So I already mentioned this, that English is a language, that Philippine languages are dialects, all right? So that's basically telling us something about how, colonialism has taught us to hierarchize the languages in the education system and the languages in society. The coloniality of teacher identity, for example, when you talk about I am a non-native speaker of English, all right? There's just so many, and then we start believing in it ourselves, that how we should define ourselves as an English teacher is to, use the word non-native speaker. Is this the only way to describe ourselves, as English language teachers, as Filipino English language teachers? No, as I will explain later on. But when you talk about non-native speaker, let's think about it a little bit more carefully. All right. When you say you are non-native speaker of English, you are describing yourself. You are putting up an identity of yourself as someone who is not. All right. So I'm an English speaker who is not a native speaker. All right. So there is a deficit, deficit perspective on this kind of identity making, because we are giving people the sense, or ourselves the sense, of who we are according to who we are not. Okay. And as what I said here, this again brings back to those ideologies and practices in the past. The same thing with the coloniality of teaching practices, right? That local languages have no place in the English classroom, precisely because there's low regard for Philippine languages, and that the only enlightened way is, this one colonial language. And we carry along, this kind of belief right now, all right, that there's no place in the classroom. But, research has shown that strategic, and I'm using the word strategic, all right, or judicious use of languages in the classroom actually facilitates the learning of English better. All right. But people, don't see this as unproblematic, as acceptable, precisely because our understanding of the English classroom is that there should only be one language in the class, which is English. The coloniality of teaching resources, that's, Western texts and approaches are privileged. And I think this is something that will be referred to in quite a number of details later on in the talks, how our, textbooks, how the choices of content and topics remain to be largely, centered on, life outside the Philippines, for example. And I think that's something that may be addressed and will be addressed later on. So, basically the idea here is decolonize English language teaching and learning. Okay, we should start thinking about, revaluing, all right, our language, Philippine languages, by first and foremost referring to them not as dialects, but these are languages. Because the moment we start revaluing them as Philippine languages and not dialects, then we revalue them as as important, as something that is part in it that we need to be proud of, all right, for example, and therefore can be useful in so many other learning contexts as well. Decolonize language teaching learning, instead of probably, for example, referring to ourselves as non-native English speaker or teacher, why not a multilingual teacher of English? Because then it surfaces who we are, and then with our multilinguality is packaged as something that is positive, something that is resourceful, something that we can use to define ourselves, because it is our multilinguality that should actually give us the advantage. It's never a disadvantage to speak many different languages as English language teachers. Local languages help facilitate the learning of English. I think I did mention that as well. I think it's important to change the shift in thinking, all right? That they are not there to interfere. They don't interfere, but they do facilitate and help, the learning of English. And of course, that local histories and cultures should actually inform our pedagogy. We have a lot of, local cultural ways of doing things, of understanding, of engaging and mobilizing everyday lives. And I think these should actually be part of English language teaching and learning, precisely because this would then help make the teaching and learning of English much more realistic, much more, in tune with who we are as Filipinos. Okay, so maabogit ng salamat, and there was no time, and of course it was intentional not to really dig deep into the specifics, because this will definitely be tackled in the next few videos. I'm just here to just simply raise these as issues for us to think about it, and let's follow them through in the coming presentation. So maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat, and I'm looking forward to participating in the panel later as well. Thanks, Chechen.
Okay, thank you so much, Ronnie, for framing the discourse for this afternoon's event. Yes, Philippine languages are not dialects, so let's remember that. Now, let me introduce our next speaker, Ms. Frances Doplon Perez. Frances is a Filipina educator with a background in humanities, development education, and an MA in English language and literature teaching. She began her teaching career in the basic education sector until she moved to the Department of English in the Ateneo de Manila University, where she has been teaching for 15 years and counting. Her research interests include social linguistics, linguistic human rights, and multilingual education. This year, she also shares her expertise as graduate school lecturer at Pinma Orolio University. Originally tiga south of Metro Manila, Frances is currently based in Nueva Ecija with her husband and two young children. Her presentation today crosses the borders of school to examine one's earliest venue of language education, the home. Everyone, Ms. Frances Doplon Perez.
Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. I hope you're all well and in good health. Today, I'll be taking a step back from the usual teaching context and I'll focus on an educational setting outside the classroom. My name is Frances Doplon Perez, and I'll be talking about the home as a site of language ideology. Now, what is ideology to begin with? Let me borrow from some definitions from Bernard Spolsky. Now, according to Spolsky, ideology is about assigning values and prestige to certain elements in society. Now, how does this apply to language? He says, language ideology refers to underlying assumptions about language and language use that constitute collective beliefs about language teaching. Now, what I'd like to focus on today is the prevailing belief among parents in the Philippines that multilingual households are disadvantageous. This belief is actually nothing new. There's been a lot of research about it, and it's very much tied to coloniality and the country's colonial history. In his work on linguistic imperialism, Robert Phillipson traces the development of structural and cultural inequalities between English and other languages as a result of countries' colonial pasts. He also discusses how linguistic imperialism has found its way to beliefs on how English should be taught. Now, one of the myths he uncovered is the subtractive fallacy, or the belief that if other languages are used much, then the standards of English will drop. At its core is the perception that the use of one language leads to the deterioration of another. It's as if one's potential for language learning is finite. Now, related to this, in the local context, Isabelle Martin examined myths about Philippine languages. And one of the misconceptions she identified is that English and Filipino are languages in opposition. In her chapter on periphery language teaching, she explains that these two languages, the language of the colonizer and the colonized, are perceived to be languages that cannot coexist in the same space. For example, in schools, it's either English is the sole medium of instruction or it's not there at all. So there's a relationship of displacement. And this brings me to another belief, which is rather prevalent in language learning scholarship, the notion of first language interference. So when I looked it up, I found something interesting in the definition of interference when it comes to language acquisition. It actually refers to the influence of one language to another. It doesn't even matter if it's about the first, the second to the third, or the third to the first. It's simply the influence of one language to another. Neutral, di ba? And we can always say if it's positive or negative. So what do we have here? The term influence is neutral, but the term interference, which is often used, is not. Interference has a negative connotation, bringing to mind disturbance, deviation, or even disruption. So the coinage of the term language interference is ideologically packed especially since it's often the first language that is framed as the offender. We rarely see it the other way around, lalo na kung yung incoming language ay English. Now, all of these provide a theoretical grounding to the perception that multilingual households are disadvantageous. So, where exactly are these beliefs found? I'm part of this online community of mothers of Filipino children, perhaps the biggest, with 43,000 members. Now, every now and then there are posts about language, and I'm happy to report that there is a strong support for multilingualism. However, a closer reading of comments reveal persistent attitudes that are symptomatic of an ideology that views multilingualism negatively. I've clustered these comments into three different strands of belief. The first strand is the belief that multilingualism confuses very young children. There are comments which parents conclude their infant or toddler was confused by the presence of another language at home. My child was confused, my daughter was confused. Confused talaga yung term na ginagamit nila. Now, they claim that multilingualism leads to bewilderment and consequently less talk. The second strand is the belief that multilingualism hinders language development. So there are comments where parents reveal that their child has a speech delay and they had been advised to use one language only. So the thinking here is that a multilingual environment causes and aggravates these delays. Finally, the third strand is the belief that multilingualism prevents effective language learning. One comment attests that it's better to speak straight English at home without mixing with other languages in order to receive best results. Another comes from a teacher who claims that using more than one language results to difficulty in learning English. Now, what we see here is an overall belief that multilingualism is an interference. Sagabal raw ito. It interferes with early language development and with English language learning. So how is this belief challenged? Let's see what the sciences say, beginning with social sciences. In social linguistics, there is this concept of translingualism. It is the view that languages are fluid and borderless. Borders are actually socially constructed and therefore have no psycholinguistic validity. So there are no separate language systems. In the mind, languages, all of these languages form part of one's holistic, integrated, and collective idiolept for communicative meaning making. Actually, this makes sense to me as a parent because I've observed that the development of my kids' own language abilities have nothing to do with the number of languages. It's about the readiness of their bodies, it's about their cognitive development. And I even remember that when my kids turn two, our pediatrician goes through the developmental milestone checklist. And for language, some of the questions I'm asked is he able to respond to his name? Is he able to follow instructions? Is he able to describe his surroundings or ask for something using 2 to 3 word phrases? Back then, my youngest would say, "Help me," or "Akin yan," without knowing their equivalents in the other language. Usually, he even mixes languages like, "Eat ako banana," and our pediatrician hears us speak that way, and that's fine with her because they all form part of his collective ability to communicate. Our pediatrician doesn't ask about the number of languages. The concern is on the whole child development. Now, let's look at the health sciences. I contacted my cousin, Pamela Rogers, who is a pediatric speech pathologist and a faculty member at the De La Salle Health Sciences Institute. So I asked her what she thinks of multilingualism as an interference. Now, she explained that the starting point of multilingualism is bilingualism. And when it comes to language acquisition, there is simultaneous bilingualism, learning languages at the same time. And there is sequential bilingualism, learning languages one after the other. Now, their patients, the children, experience speech and language delays because they already have learning and developmental disabilities to begin with. But in their field, there's an observation that a number of parents and carers believe that simultaneous bilingualism has a higher cognitive demand on children. So, nahirapan na nga yung anak ko, papahirapan pa ng dalawang language. Yun yung pag-iisip dito. But this is just a perception. Of course, we acknowledge the experiences and opinions of these concerned parents and carers. But perhaps they just haven't encountered an alternative perspective. So, my cousin sent me research from various journals in pediatrics, speech pathology, and developmental disorders. These studies basically compare children from monolingual and multilingual households. A study focused on kids with autism, another focused on kids with Down syndrome and other developmental disorders. And what I've gleaned from the research are these 3 points. While children already experience struggles due to their conditions, no aggravating effects were seen in kids from multilingual households. So the level of challenge remained the same, whether monolingual or multilingual. Second, there is evidence that children with special needs are successfully able to develop second and even later third language skills. So breakthrough is possible. And third, what accounts for the patient's varying levels of language competence is the quality of input, not the presence of another language. So, bakit nahihirapan mag-Ingles? Ayon sa research, wala ito sa exposure ng iba pang wika, kundi nasa kalidad ng pagkatuto ng bata. So, their verdicts are similar. There's no conclusive evidence linking simultaneous language learning to additional language problems. Again, these are caused by pre-existing cognitive and physiological conditions, not language input. Now, I think these beliefs, often well-intentioned but misinformed, create monolingual pockets in our multilingual society. What do I mean? Pockets, bulsa, maliit, nakatago, pero may laman. So, situations where walls are put up between languages. One language only, no commingling, huh? Because there's a perception that language contact is dangerous. And by doing so, multiple languages are treated as monolingual entities. Multilingual ka nga, pero monolingual naman yung paggamit mo sa bawat wika. So, these actually reinforce the imagined monolingual worlds created by narratives of colonialism. Only this language belongs here. Only this language belongs there. No mixing. This is quite disconnected from the present day realities we find ourselves in, which is very multicultural. Furthermore, these beliefs reinforce the vicious notion that local languages are not enough, that they can contaminate and even adulterate. Only English is enough. So in this presentation, we examined ideology that views multilingualism as a threat to language development and English language learning. These run counter to decades of research on the advantages of multilingualism, scientific research on speech pathology and developmental pediatrics, and the notion of linguistic diversity. Now let me end with a quote. Charity begins at home. The home is a seedbed of one's values, principles, and beliefs, including those about language. And these can influence stakeholder driven language policies in years to come. Not all ideologies are created equal. Some are more charitable than others. May we foster a genuine respect for all languages, for all peoples. Let's uphold beliefs that are inclusive, equitable, and empowering. Daghang salamat.
Thank you so much for giving us a glimpse of how our homes can become our children's first classroom. Di ba, Francis? And may implication yan. That's something that we're going to talk about later. Thank you, Francis, for that presentation. Let us now move on to our next presentation. And this time we have Ms. Patria Garcia as our speaker. Ria is the head teacher at Teaching Little Children Play School. She is currently finishing her master's degree from the University of the Philippines Open University. It is in the same university that she also recently obtained her diploma in language and literacy education. She has an AB literature degree cum laude from the University of Santo Tomas. She was also a high school English language and literature teacher at St. Pedro Poveda College. She is an advocate of early literacy and is actively promoting an appreciation for stories and reading among her students. Her research interests are on oral language development, neurodivergent students and their emerging reading skills, and multilingualism, and decolonization in the preschool classroom. She is in the process of curating books for her school library, balancing foreign books with locally written ones. So her presentation invites us to view two children's stories through the lens of coloniality, specifically coloniality of knowledge. Everyone, Ms. Patria Garcia.
Magandang araw po sa lahat. Ako po si Patria Garcia at sa araw na ito, ating pong pag-uusapan ang tungkol sa Reading Against the Grain, the stories that we read to preschool children through the lens of coloniality. Ngayong araw na ito, ang ating pong pag-uusapan ay tungkol sa coloniality, specifically coloniality of knowledge. At ating pong pag-uusapan ng dalawang libro na gamit ang lente ng coloniality. And then we will do a comparative analysis of these two books and a decolonial reading of these books. Finally, we will be talking of ways on how we can push back against coloniality. Let me first talk about my own experience as a reader. I was a literature major while I was in college, and we were taught of certain books that belong to the literary canon, or what we call the classics. So by classics, we mean the books that have stood the test of time. And these are the books that are required reading of any curriculum. Specifically, when we talk of great books that are part of everyone's collection or libraries. These are the books that are passed on from one generation to the next, and the books that survive the test of time. Now, how about children as readers? Now, when children are reading, they are attempting to make sense of their reality through their immediate experiences or the comfort derived from the pages of a book. This is from Garces Baxal in 2021. What happens when children are engaged in picture books and storytelling? These are the advantages that they say happens to children when they are engaged in books. Of course, we all know that listening and reading to stories develop children's language and literacy. They validate children's lived experiences, and it promotes recognition of social differences, as well as contributing to empathy and respect and understanding between and among cultures. Now let's go back to what we were talking about earlier, the literary canons. The term literary canon refers to a body of books, narratives, and other texts that we consider to be the most important and influential of a particular time, period, or place. But when we talk of these books, have we ever thought about whose voices are valued and whose are not? And whose stories are absent and whose stories are present? Which brings us to a sample kindergarten canon book list, or the list of books that are deemed appropriate or deemed important to be part of any library or book reading list. So we have the Mother Goose Rhymes, Fables of Aesop, the books of Dr. Seuss, the Brothers Grimm, Charles Perrault, Hans Christian Andersen, and one of the books that we usually read to the kids at the start of the school year, The Kissing Hand by Audrey Penn. Now, if you notice, mostly the books were written by men, white men at that. They are all written, or most of them are written in English, and coming from the inner circle of English speakers. Now, why do we need to discuss the literary canons? because this ties closely with our topic for today, which is coloniality. When we say coloniality, we are talking of three kinds. There's coloniality of knowledge, of power, and of being. Let us first define coloniality. Coloniality are long-standing patterns of power that emerge as a result of colonialism, but that define culture, labor, intersubjective relations, and knowledge production, well beyond the strict limits of colonial administration. For our purposes today, we are focusing on coloniality of knowledge, which is a form of colonization that privileges Eurocentric knowledge over other knowledge systems. It labels indigenous knowledge systems as primitive knowledge that is not at the level of European knowledge by Isabelle Martin. What is so problematic about coloniality and coloniality of knowledge is that their invisibility makes it possible for the colonized subjects to participate in the activities that sustain the very structure of coloniality within which they exist as victims. The case in point is the kind of stories that we read to our students and our children, our very young children. So we might be asking ourselves, how is coloniality of knowledge operationalized in the preschool classroom? Let us break it down by talking about and comparing these two books about the theme or topic going to market. The first one is a locally produced book written by May Tobias Papa, Araw sa Palengke, and illustrated by Isabelle Rojas. This was published in 2010. And the other book is To Market, written by Anne Miranda. This was published by Harcourt in 1997. I went to Goodreads to look for reviews of these two books. So both are very well recommended by the reviews in the website. And they all agree it's a good book, brilliantly illustrated, captures children's attention. The sing-song rhyming pattern makes this story enjoyable to read and entertaining to listen to. So Publishers Weekly said this is a clever riff on the old nursery rhyme, wherein a plump matron makes a series of increasingly calamitous purchases of animals at a supermarket. This is one market trip children will wish to take again and again. How about Araw sa Palengke? Araw sa Palengke, according to a Goodreads review, is a pretty good introduction to help ease the children into the various stimuli they might face at a public market. A busy market may be overwhelming for a small child, with risks such as getting stepped on and getting lost. O, ano yung usapan natin? Di ba walang magpapabili? Pero sa huli, binilhan pa rin. Wika nga, may mga magulang bang makakatiis sa mga mabait na anak? Says a Twitter review named Hey Keeb. Now, when we do a decolonial reading of To Market, these are the things that we notice. Mainly, it's about a grandmotherly type of woman in high heels, wearing a turban, totes a handbag, decked in jewels. She must be quite rich to be able to afford buying whole animals and to be able to go back again and again and again at the supermarket. This grandma lives alone. She has a big house with all the modern conveniences. This grandma had to go back again and again at the supermarket, which, come to think of it, reinforces the stereotype of old persons being forgetful. This grandma goes to the supermarket each time alone. And this grandma has a big house to store all the animals that she has bought. And her solution to her problems is to buy more and more stuff. Now, what are the dominant themes in this book? Well, for one, it's about buying things just because one can. And buying these things even though one lives alone and has no one to share it to. And also, one can just sleep away one's worries and troubles and the messes that one has in one's home. This book is written in English. Okay, now let's look about the book. Let's look at the book Araw sa Palengke by May Tobias Papa. So this is about a girl who accompanies her mother to the market. The market is hot and noisy, smelly and muddy. But it's also fascinating and colorful because it's seen from a point of view that's only about 3 feet tall. When they arrive home, our little girl unpacks the bayong to find a surprise wrapped in newspaper at the bottom. It's her joy we feel in the little dance that she does. Now, this book is written in English and Filipino. The setting is that of a local market and not a supermarket, unlike in the book To Market. And the story presents the market as a microcosm of a community. And this book exposes young children to culturally specific customs and language. So there's mention of bayong, pakwan, lansones, bibingka, kalan, palayok, and suke. Who are the characters in the story? We have the nanay, who asked her daughter to accompany her to the market, and who woke up her daughter early in the morning to help her get ready. This nanay is full of bilin before they visit the palengke, specifically telling her daughter bawal magpabili because they only have enough for the things that they need. Also, this mother is attuned to the needs and wants of her daughter. Why? Because even though she strictly forbade her daughter to ask for something that she wants in the market, she still gave in because she knew that her daughter badly wanted the palayok. How about the daughter? The daughter resisted the temptation to ask her mother to buy her the palayok because she knows that they only have enough to buy the things that they need. What are the dominant themes from the book to market to market? First, it's all about a mother's love to her daughter. Ang nanay na hindi matitiis ang kanyang anak kahit na kapos sa pambili ng mga bagay na kanilang kailangan, ginagawa ng paraan ng isang nanay. And a daughter's show of respect and obedience to her mother. There's also the sights and sounds in a Filipino wet market that we are familiar with, and the children will be familiar with after they have listened or read the story. There's also the value of temperance on the part of the daughter, na huwag magpabili at sapat lang ang pera sa pangangailangan. So yan ay napaka-natural sa isang pamilyang Pilipino sa ating kultura. Now, paano naging importante ang ating pagbasa ng dalawang istorya sa usapin ng decoloniality? Sabi ni Funi Su noong 2017, bilang mga guro, meron tayong mga pwedeng gawin para ma-resist ang coloniality at makapag-practice ng decolonial na option sa ating mga classroom. At sinabi niya, ang una ay ang philosophical, ideological, and theoretical reconceptualizations or decolonizing our minds. At we'll focus on that for today. Meron tayong tinatawag na reading against the grain. Ano ang ibig sabihin nito? Nangangahulugan that we analyze the stories that we read to our students. Sila ba ay nagsiserve as mirror or window? By window, we mean ito ba ay istoryang nagpapakita ng pamumuhay ng mga tao sa ibang lugar, ibang lahi, ibang kultura? Or ito ba ay isang istorya na nagtataas ng salamin para ating makita ang sarili nating refleksyon sa pamumuhay ng mga tao makikita natin sa mga storya na to. And sadly, as Filipinos, we've had few literary mirrors that affirm our identities. Maybe because, as we have said earlier, we subscribe to the literary canons that are Western in nature. So, as a solution, we can choose multicultural and multilingual books instead of being boxed by the literary canons that are mostly having books written by Westerners. Number two, we can also consider the narratives found in the stories that we read to our students. Ang mga stories na to would shape our students' collective memories of their own and others' histories. In the stories that we read, whose voices are valued and whose are not, whose stories are absent, and do the stories that we read to our children enable them to recognize their own communities? So ito po yung mga tanong na ating kailangang sagutin bago tayo pumili ng mga stories that we will be reading to our children. And also as teachers, we have that very unique role of being gatekeepers of the choices that we can make for our children, for our students. So it's a very big responsibility because the stories that we choose to read to them would say a lot about the message that we want to impart to them. So there's a need to redefine the meaning of literary canons, specifically as it relates to our own context. These are some questions to ask when choosing storybooks that might help us be better at analyzing the books that we choose to read to our students and the books that we choose for our own libraries. Sinong sumulat ng libro at sino ang gumuhit ng mga illustrations sa mga pahina nito? And who has the power in this story? How do they use that power? What are the consequences of certain behaviors? What behavior traits are rewarded? What behavior traits are punished? And how is language used to create images of people in a particular group? Also, what does this narrative say about race, class, gender, culture, age? Like if we go back to the story to market, what does it say about old people? What is the message that it says about this Lola living alone? Do we see the same kind of Lolas here in the Philippines who are alone, who goes to market alone? So those are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves before choosing books to read to our children and our students. And as teachers, there's a need to deconstruct misinformation. We need to examine our pedagogies, our classroom environment, the biases we have absorbed and accumulated. So this means making changes, affirming diversity, and to help children resist bias. This means constantly questioning our current practices as teachers and whether the ideologies that we espouse and share to them are the same ones that we want our children and our students to learn and absorb. Now, to conclude with my presentation, coloniality of knowledge still persists in our own classrooms. It is evident in the choices that we make in the stories that we choose to read or not read to our students. And to counter these, we can read the stories beyond their seemingly innocent presentations to look for hidden themes and ideologies to evaluate their appropriateness. Also, let's call for textbooks, books, and methods to be situated in local context. One such valuable resource for multicultural books is the website Mirrors, Windows, and Doors. Maybe you can check it out so you can have can consult a list of books that we can alternatively offer to our students. So these are examples of children's books that are worth checking out. I especially want to mention the book Kwento ni Lola Basyang by Severino Reyes. I became familiar with the book when I am already an adult, and that's quite sad because I would have maybe appreciated it more in Filipino history and culture. And as teachers, we need to be deliberate in our choice of reading materials that would represent our students, their languages, and their culture. Incidentally, while I was researching topics on this presentation, I came across a collection of books written by Nick Joaquin for kids. And you might want to also check it out. The title is Pop Stories for Groovy Kids by Nick Joaquin. Now, to close my presentation, I would like to read a quote from the late Bienvenido Lumbera. Sir Bien was my professor in college and he taught us Filipino literature. And he says, hanggat ang mga panitikang pangrehiyon ay hindi pa nasisinop ng mga iskolar at kritiko, nakabinbin ang pagbubuo ng tunay at autentikong canon. At hindi pa rin tayo handa para pag-usapan ng may bahagyang katiyakan ang tinatawag nating pambansang panitikan. Maraming salamat po sa lahat sa inyong pakikinig at magandang araw po.
Thank you so much, Ria, for bringing us back to the time when we were little school children ourselves, reading storybooks that seemed to be too detached from our own realities. Diba? So, but we'll talk more about that later. Meantime, let's move on to our next presentation. Our last speaker is Mr. Philip Andrew Carlitos. Philip Andrew teaches linguistics, literature, and language research courses at the Institute of Teacher Education, Davao del Norte State College. He earned both his AB in English and Master of English and Applied Linguistics degrees from the University of Southeastern Philippines. He later earned units in professional education from the Ateneo de Davao University. An offshoot of his graduate school thesis has been published by the Journal of Language and Literature of Universitas Sanata Dharma in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. His presentation today provides us an example of a simple learning plan of an English composition lesson with local contextualization. So everyone, Mr. Philip Andrew Carlitos.
Hello, I'm Philip from Davao del Norte State College, and I am privileged to deliver a presentation on the topic Decolonizing the English Language Teaching and Learning in the Philippines. Here I will be presenting a sample learning plan on a composition lesson with local knowledge integration. So I entitled this presentation Writing Locally, Integrating Local Knowledge in an English Composition Course. Now, the outline of my presentation, first, I'll talk about the rationale, and then I'll proceed to the presentation of my sample learning plan. And then I'll talk about the challenges and limitations I see with localizing the instruction. And then fourth would be my future intentions. So the question is, why this topic? I remember the answer of Pia Wirtz back during the Q&A portion at Miss Universe 2015 when she was asked about the US military presence in the country. And I quote, "We were colonized by the Americans and we have their culture and our traditions even up to this day." Exactly. Colonialism may have ended long time ago, but its influence still lives on up to this day, hence the term coloniality. In the words of Maldonado Torres, 2007, coloniality survives colonialism. And one of the various domains where this coloniality can be observed is education. Through the English language, the American imperialism has been maintained through textbooks, academic standards, academic policies, among others. Kumaravadivelu, 2014 in Su 2015 calls this as imperial pedagogy for invisibilizing conquest. And we allow such continued conquest because we subscribe to it and we practice it in our educational processes and systems. Interestingly, Tupas 2020, in his chapter in the book Sociopolitics in English Language Testing, published by Bloomsbury Academic, critiques the U.S. Development Aid in English Language Teaching Project JEEP as native speakerist, homogenizing, and universalizes the approaches to the learning and teaching of English. Basically, that is the problem with colonial English education. It favors one variety, one nation, and causes othering of local varieties and even tags them as wrong, unacceptable, or inferior. The problem with colonial English education is it lacks contextualization. It focuses only on the language instead of the language user. However, there is no denying that the widespread use of English, not only in the Philippines, but also around the world, has paved the way for its localization, aside from its globalization. In its CMO number 75 series of 2017, section 6.3.1b, under the program Objectives for the Bachelor of Secondary Education major in English, the Commission on Higher Education even recognizes the glocal, which is the global and local nature of English, and the multilingual contexts in which it is taught. Hence, English needs to be taught in context in order to make it culturally and personally relevant to the students, especially that Philippines is a multicultural and multilingual nation. Su proposes strategies for addressing the enduring influence of colonial English language teaching. Among those Su mentions are Kumaravadivelu, who suggests post-method pedagogy that emphasizes the local context of instruction, Brott Griffler and Samimi, who suggests the use of intentional classroom dialogues for reconstructing identities and challenging language learner and teacher labels such as non-native speaker, as well as a number of scholars who recommend the use of instructional materials that reflect the diverse array of English and the contexts where they were spoken. And to add to this list of scholars who suggest strategies, Bernardo and Madruño in 2015 proposed the Philippine English-based model for teaching English grammar. And speaking of teaching English in context, I remember the time when I joined a workshop on local knowledge integration in instruction organized by a university in Davao City. So local knowledge integration is an initiative that aims to generate knowledge from local communities or contexts that the students are situated in and have it incorporated in the teaching of different disciplines, including English. The goal is to contextualize specifically the lessons so that students do not only find it relevant to them, but also to help preserve their personal or cultural identity even as they learn new concepts and principles. Now, let me go to the exact output I came up with during that workshop. I chose the course Grammar and Composition because I was teaching that course at the time and focused on paragraph by cause and effect. We were grouped and we were assigned to a local community in Davao City. I was part of the group that went to a neighborhood near the Davao River. There I met Benjamin, a local resident of that area. As you can see on the picture, my interview with him centered on his primary problem, their primary problem in that area, which is the flood caused by the overflow of the water in the Davao River. The story of Benjamin was what I used as writing prompt for my composition lesson, specifically the cause and effect paragraph writing. So here it is. The course is English 13, Grammar and Composition, and the core topic is paragraph by cause and effect. The objectives for this lesson are for the students to identify cause and effect relationships, and from that, write a cause and effect paragraph. For pre-writing, there are guide questions. Ask, what is the compelling problem of the community where Benjamin lives, and what are the contributory causes of such problem? Then, I present the story of Benjamin as he narrated an instance when a flood hit their residence. So in the form of caption, for half of his life, Benjamin has lived on by troubled waters. He says he is helpless of his condition because he considers himself part of the marginalized. The community where he lives has grown rapidly, having easy access to the metropolis. Benjamin has learned to deal with his living conditions. He recalls the worst flood he experienced, which happened in January 20. I think this was year 2013. Benjamin describes how high the level of the water plus the soil was, pointing to that part of his arm. The DCWD, or Davao City Water District pipe, awaits to be removed. And Benjamin says he is helpless about the immense amount of garbage in the city. The water current that day, going back to the narration, swallowed the house that used to stand in this area. And therefore, sandbags have been placed to fight against the threat of natural disaster. So that's it. That's the story of Benjamin. And from that, the students are asked to come up with a concept map to trace the relationship of events the pictures represent. This is still part of the pre-writing stage. And then after that, they discuss how they came up with such map to the class. So as part of the evaluation and the writing proper, they are to write a cause and effect paragraph based on the pre-writing output with the mechanics, unity, support, coherence, sentence skills. And this have been the mechanics used in this course, Grammar and Composition. So there you go. It is a simple learning plan presentation of a composition lesson. Those are just the basic components of this learning plan. Teachers may deepen the contextualization and even let students share their own cause and effect stories. So instead of using the writing prompt and the sample paragraph from the book, which at the time we were using John Langan, he's an American author, a local narrative, one that can also be the narrative of any of the students, a familiar context has been used to introduce the cause effect paragraph writing. So you see, localizing the instructional context will not only decolonize the teaching of cause-effect paragraph writing, but it will also make students feel personally invested in learning because it is set in the context that they can relate to and eventually give voice to their everyday experiences and the experiences of the members of their local community through writing. So now, what are the challenges and limitations I see with localizing the English instruction? I would just mention two. First, scarcity and the accessibility of resources. I believe that English writing textbooks and other English-related instructional materials must have local contexts, language production prompts, and examples. This would foster an awareness of world Englishes and enable a move away from a textbook industry that has been structured to privilege the centers of global power, according to SU 2017. However, since we are in a pandemic, most of the sources and resources would be internet-based, which are highly dominated by foreign content. So it would be hard to find sources with or resources with local context online. Hence, I go to the second challenge, which is the teacher's efforts. No, the teacher would really, it would really take a great deal of effort on the teacher's end when we say localizing the English instruction. I believe there are teachers who are trying their best to put their instruction in context. However, there are still those who might just implement the default, copy what is on the foreign authored book, or just take whatever is available online because again maybe there's no time to update or to contextualize the instruction. However, that is not a valid reason. Effort talaga ang pag-contextualize ng instruction, but dapat naman talagang mag-effort si teacher if he or she wants his or her students to learn and make meaning out of what they have learned. So where do I go from here? This English 13 course, which I feature in this presentation, is no longer offered in college since the inception of senior high school. However, this can be picked up by senior high school English teachers, even by other basic education English teachers in designing their lessons. So I can start and continue that conversation, this conversation about localizing the instruction so as to decolonize the English language teaching and learning. I can also start a discussion and get that conversation going among my colleagues, especially I am assigned to the BS Ed English program. I can get that conversation going among my colleagues who handle courses like teaching and assessment of macro skills, teaching and assessment of grammar, technical writing, and other courses, major courses in the BS Ed English program. Especially as recommended by SU 2017 that the arena of teacher training and professional development possesses a special potential for transforming English language teaching and for creating spaces of decolonial possibilities in the classroom. And of course, I shall continue the practice in my own classes. So it is not to say that we should stop using foreign authored and produced resources. We can still get so many things from them, but the use of such should not be at the expense of our own culture, our own narratives, and our own identity. So daghang salamat sa pagpaminaw. Thank you so much for listening. These are the resources I used for this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for showing us how we can localize our instructional materials considering our own invaluable immediate contexts. So, can we give all of them a big round of applause naman? May mga virtual claps din dyan. I'm sure many of you, o may mga nag-heart pa, salamat. I'm sure many of you have a lot of questions or reactions after listening to the presentations. But before we accommodate some of the questions, your questions from the audience, let us first listen to our reactors who will join us now in the panel discussion. Allow me to introduce first our first reactor and discussant, Dr. Marian Perfecto. Marian is Associate Professor at the Ateneo de Manila University. As a teacher trainer and educator, she has worked with secondary and tertiary teachers in the country and the region in the areas of materials and curriculum development, language and literature teaching. She served as chair of the English department of the Ateneo and as executive director of ACELT. And she was also one of the consultants of the Commission on Higher Education for the GE course Purposive Communication, and is also one of the authors of the Ateneo published textbook on purposive communication. Her research focuses on teacher cognition, ELT reading and writing, multilingual education, and translanguaging in ELT. Another reactor and discussant is Dr. Nicanor Ginto. Nick is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Languages, Literature, and Humanities at the College of Arts and Sciences, Southern Luzon State University. He holds a PhD in Language, Discourse, and Communication, jointly offered by the University of Hong Kong and King's College London. To complete our panel discussants today, we also want to welcome back Ruwani, Frances, Ria, and Andrew. Please join us again. So let me ask the panelists. Siguro we can start with Marian or Nick, whoever is ready. What do you think of the presentations? Marian, would you like to start?
Yes, please. So good afternoon, everyone. First of all, congratulations to both the students and the teachers of SEED. You've started something very worthwhile, and I'm makikiride on ako doon sa metaphor ng garden, ha. And I hope that these seeds germinate and eventually grow into trees of knowledge and practices that we want in our English language learning classes. I have 3 key takeaways from the sharing of Ria, Andrew, and Frances. I zeroed in on these points because of their implications for teacher training and teacher education, because that's where my heart lies. I'm a teacher trainer and I'm a teacher educator. First is the importance of social linguistics and reflective teaching in teacher education. And I actually want to focus on teaching, reflective teaching. The experiences of Ria, Andrew, and Frances reveal to us how deeply ingrained, not just in our educational system, but also in our values and belief system, the effects of colonialism. What's most worrying is that we're not even aware that we're breathing and living coloniality of knowledge because of years of passing on what we thought were just neutral texts and neutral methods. In one of his articles in 2015, Ruwani, when he talked about MTB-MLE then, he laments that the problems facing the MLE policy are ideological and structural. And so he suggests that these problems be addressed by teacher education programs that focus on teacher ideology. Similarly, decolonizing ALT can only be done if we go beyond teaching methods and strategies in the initial preparation of our future teachers and the in-service training of current teachers. We need to focus on teacher ideology. And this is where reflective teaching comes in. Most teacher preparation courses and ELT seminars focus on teaching methods and principles. But I think more than the whats and the hows, though, reflective teaching needs to be included in courses and workshops for teachers, since this will give them the opportunity to reflect on their own beliefs, their own situations, and their own contexts. And this will allow them to make principled adjustments, most especially if they see that existing policies are not suitable to their own realities. If teachers reflect on their own beliefs and ideology, they can be made aware of the nature of the coloniality of knowledge. And to quote Ria, they'd know how to push back. So this was very clearly seen in the experiences of Ria and Andrew. When given the chance to reflect on their own teaching practices, they realized what they needed to address. Second is the importance of teacher agency. This is related to the first one. Reflective teachers can enact their agency in the classroom. Institutional constraints are realities that face our teachers. What can we do if the school has an English-only policy? What choice do we have if the school wants to look towards the canon? And I'm again borrowing Ria's words, for instructional materials. And I believe the experiences of our teachers here showed us what we can do. A reflective teacher knows what to do and finds agency to address this issue. Biesta and Tedder, in their article in 2006, said that teacher agency is teachers' capacity to critically shape their responses to challenging situations. And our teachers built on their strengths and worked on their options to negotiate the policy that they have in school and the reality successfully. Because because their consideration is addressing their students' needs, they make the necessary adjustments to facilitate learning and achieving their teaching objectives. Let's replace to market with araw sa palengke. If we don't have a choice and we need to use these foreign books, let's at least teach our students to read against the grain. And again, I'm borrowing Ria's words, or to resist the bias in the materials read. Or let's use local context, suggested by Andrew, as writing prompts in our students' cause and effect essays. Isn't writing about problems experienced in the students' community more meaningful than giving them a generic prompt? Or influencer colleagues. So baby steps. Baby steps that will create this culture of decolonization. Let's not aim to overhaul the curriculum for now. And finally, the role of parents in English language learning. The experience of Frances emphasizes the important role that parents play, and apparently even pediatricians play, in our students' English language learning. Attitude to and beliefs about language are important in language learning, and these are first developed at home. Our students come to class thinking that speaking incorrect English is a measure of one's intelligence because they grew up hearing, ang hina mag-English, ang bobo naman. Or talk to me in English only, bawal mag-Tagalog, bawal mag-Bisaya, bawal gumamit ng dialect. And of course, you want to lash out. They're not dialects, they're languages. Okay, but that's another issue. But research has shown that family language policies influence children's learning and development. Actually, in one study cited by Gu and Han in their article in 2020, the study showed that parental involvement and support are the most important factors in the heritage language learning of bilingual migrant children. So they learn all these things at home. And just as an aside, I like telling this story to Rowani because I know it makes him happy. I assigned one of his earlier articles about one of his favorite P-pop bands, SB19, to my freshman university students. The article talks about how P-pop is normalizing multilingualism in our country, and my students read this article using Perusal and they write their annotations. I'm amazed at the insights that they develop about languages because of this article. And one of the common things about their comments is how their attitudes toward English, Filipino, and the other Filipino languages were shaped not just in school, but also at home. They grew up believing that Bisaya, Cebuano are dialects, not languages, because this is how it was taught in school, and this is what they grew up in at home. And so when they read the article of Ruwani, their world is shaken. They had to re-examine their beliefs about languages. So how might we engage the parents so that they foster language beliefs that are, and I quote Frances, inclusive, equitable, and empowering? Or maybe the question is, should we even try? It seems to be beyond the scope of our responsibilities as teachers. It's hard enough to deal with the various problems in the classroom, so why add to these? So I don't know the answer. And now I'm saying this because Frances was my student in MA. Perhaps Frances can start with her PhD now and do a study on family language policy in our context and let us know how this might be done.
Thank you so much, Marian. Ang dami mo namang seeds na plinant dun sa reaction na yun. So, I'm getting a lot of comments and reactions now in the chat box. Pero pakinggan muna natin siguro si Nick. Nick, I think you also have something to say?
Yes, hello everyone. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. First of all, I wish to thank Cheche, Ruwani, the Ateneo Center for English Language Teaching, and the Sociolinguist Inquirer for this opportunity to be part of this webinar. I am extremely glad to have had the opportunity na makita yung output ni na Francis, ni Rhea, at ni Andrew. Salamat sa inyong lahat kasi ang dami kong natutunan dito sa presentation na ito at sa mga napag-usapan pa kanina. More than anything else, their output got me thinking about my own work and how I myself approach language teaching. Many of the things that I'm going to say right now are actually said very well by Marian, but I'm going to say them still in my own way to reinforce the message that we're trying to convey through this webinar. The three presentations that we've seen gave a short yet comprehensive background into the theory of decolonization in English language teaching and learning. This term, decolonization, seems to be quite important right now, as mentioned by Ruwani earlier, in many academic circles. Medyo intimidating, I know, kasi the term itself is not only mouthful, pero yung potential cognitive load niya, ika nga parang nakaka-nosebleed. I'm one of those who felt this back when I was, the first time I heard it, only to find out that some of what I do in my own language classroom are aligned with the ethos of advocates of decolonization. So maybe some of us have been engaged in some form of decolonization efforts of our English language classrooms all along, without calling it a decolonization project. But knowing that there are movements like this allows us to strengthen our practices, I believe, away from the colonial clout that English is often associated with. Ito yung ipinakita sa atin ni na Francis, Rhea, at ni Andrew. But aside from this, I would say the topics that the three of them discussed are very much linked with one another in the sense that their presentations invite us to think, reflect, reevaluate, and even unlearn what we may have been doing in the teaching and learning of languages. Na nabanggit nga ni Marian kanina, that we have to cultivate that sense of reflective teaching. So Francis talked about language ideologies at home that inform what is often the family language policy implicitly imposed by the more powerful members of the family, like the parents. If anything, I would say this is where we should start if we would like to come up with a more informed decision as to how we can approach our own English language teaching and learning practices. I believe na mahalaga ito kasi hindi naman pumapasok ang ating mga students sa ating language classrooms na suspended ang kanilang belief systems. Wherever they go, they bring along those linguistic and cultural baggage they picked up through the years. But first and foremost, those cultural baggage do come from home. Ria's presentation is tied with this understanding that it is at home, if not during our formative years in school, that we are acquainted with specific worldviews and gradually socialized into particular social roles. The books that we are asked to read, if not given much thought, can make or break a Filipino child. Dito nga naisip ko bigla yung pinapanood ng mga maliliit na pamangkin ko. Favorite nila yung Peppa Pig at Coco Melon. And these are shows that allow or give them access to relatively more valued variety of English, but at the same time acquaint them into a worldview that may be detached from from their immediate environment. And I know there are some teachers as well in the elementary school that would ask their students to watch Peppa Pig as part of their class. And this may have long-term implications in their sense of identity. And so I join Ria in her call for us to read against the grain when we choose reading materials or just about any form of instructional materials we use in our language classrooms. So just as Ria asks herself, I also wish for us to ask, who writes the stories? Who benefits from these stories? And who is missing from the stories? Now, it is in Andrew's presentation where we see the explicit invitation for us to become teacher researchers, to be knowledge producers in our own right, and for our own teaching practice, and not simply knowledge consumers who would rely on some materials and methods that are already out there or that may be new or trendy sa ibang bansa. Andrew invites us to look around us, our immediate environment, the immediate environment of our students, to come up with instructional materials that address matters that matter to our students, like those that are closer to home. So to me, this approach not only localizes instruction in English, but it offers our students a sense of ownership and commitment to their learning. This is important in this information age, I believe, kasi mas ma-harness natin ang potential ng ating students kung yung particular information that they get from us are something that they can call their own and something that they could commit to in the hopes of making a positive difference. Mas maganda pa nga sana kung involved din sila sa knowledge production process. What Francis, Ria, and Andrew prepared for us are definitely excellent and compelling ways by which we can decolonize our English language classroom or any language classrooms for that matter. They are products of their independent thinking, inspired by their individual working environments, and informed by processes of personal interrogation about their very own practices, while at the same time being aware about how English is deeply embedded in the country's colonial history and currently in the unequal global flow of resources and access to opportunities. And as I mentioned earlier, some approaches to decolonizing ELT are already part of the training of pre-service teachers. Nabanggit na rin ito earlier, I think ni Marian. More than a decade ago, I have been an undergraduate, I have had undergraduate training on ELT, and almost all of my classes pointed towards creating localized instruction and materials based on local knowledge. And my thesis was in fact about it. But while this was the case, I was also somehow socialized into thinking that English majors are, if I may say so, at the top of the food chain among the many subject areas that are available. That majoring in English not only could very easily land me a job here and abroad, but that it's also a status symbol at the same time. Now, looking back, if this is how pre-service teachers are trained to think, we see how much it shapes and is shaped by the ideas that place English in the pedestal where English is viewed as a means to get higher paying jobs or jobs elsewhere other than in the country. And in this sense, English is seen to fuel what sociologist Yasmin Ortiga would call the global labor factory that the Philippines has become. Now, as educators, we might wish to ask ourselves, who are the listeners that we envision our English proficient learners to talk to? Anong klaseng English speaker ang nai-imagine natin sa ating students at para kanino? Indeed, it can be said that changing people's perspectives about English, what it does to people and what people do or can do with it, requires systematic change. But it can start with us, the educators. Ito yung nakita ko sa presentations ni Francis, ni Ria at ni Andrew. They started reflecting on their own practices. They started noticing these connections and went into translating these realizations into their own practices. I'm sure many of you would say na ginagawa naman namin to or pinipilit namin gawin to. And my heart goes with teachers on the ground, the ones who try to negotiate policies from above and the actual needs of our students and ourselves from below. Mahirap kung ang kalaban halimbawa ay sistema, ang mga magulang, or yung school administrators na may kanya-kanyang paniniwala at expectation sa kung paano ba itinuturo ang Ingles o ang iba pang mga wika natin. At this point, I wish to speak to school administrators. Let's not lose sight of how it was like to be a teacher. Let's give them space and time to think about their own practices. Let's give them space and time to really be researchers of local knowledge systems. Magagawa lamang natin ito kung kahit papaano mababawasan ng kanilang yung ibang mga gawain. And as a final point, I'm sorry for taking this, if I'm taking too long. As a final point, hindi sana dito matapos ang ating usapan. Sabi nga ni Andrew, let's continue the conversation. Sana madala natin ito hindi lang sa ating mga paaralan o silid-aralan, kundi sa ating kanya-kanyang komunidad. Kasi sa tingin ko, kailangan natin yung tinatawag nating whole society approach. And this webinar is a way forward that approach. Marami mang naidulot na hindi maganda itong pandemyang ito, but I think isa sa mga masasabi kong magandang naidulot kahit paano ay nagkaroon tayo ng pagkakataong pag-usapan ang mga isyong ito sa isang platform na mas marami at posibleng mas marami ang makapakinig at makiisa. At marahil ito na yung simula at sana'y hindi ang huli. Dalhin natin ang usapan sa mga lugar na ating ginagalawan at pinagtatrabahuhan. Dalhin natin ang ganitong diskurso sa ating kanya-kanyang tahanan. Yun lamang muna, Cheche. Maraming salamat muli kay Francis, kay Ria, at kay Andrew. At syempre kay Marian at Ruani.
Okay, thank you so much, Nick. Well, definitely hindi ito ang huli. And just like what we said earlier, this is going to be a series of webinars coming from ACELT. And as you mentioned, this is just ACELT's way of making sure that we continue the conversation. So before I give the floor to the other speakers, siguro we can look at the reactions from the chat box. Ang dami, overwhelming actually, nakakatuwa. And I cannot mention your names anymore, but according to one of our participants, all of your talks, your presentations, and even the reactors' reactions, that was Pat. Yan ang sabi nila. Thanks all speakers. I find your views highly inspiring. And thank you very much for this insightful and meaningful webinar. Mga nag-a-agree talaga. Sabi ng isa, I agree with Nick. I think we are doing it already in our English classrooms, but we are not just aware of it. So naming it gives it power, the practice, the movement. So ang dami-dami pa. Siguro we'll go back to that later. But among our speakers on the floor, you might want to say something or react to somebody else's presentation. Ria, Andrew, and Frances, or even Wani. Pwede rin reaction to what Marian and Nick said. Diba? Ria?
I think I would also like to add that it's also a process of self-reflection on how the policies that we have been adhering to have affected also the lives that we have lived, especially in the course. As I was reading the assigned papers, I had to look back at the practices that I thought were the best practices that I should be subscribing to were really questionable. And looking back now, I wish I had made better decisions. I wish I was better informed, but now we can just move forward. And as I've mentioned earlier, we are gatekeepers, especially with the things that we ask our students to read, to watch, as what Nick has mentioned about watching Peppa Pig. That might be another field that we can study how it affects young children and what messages it sends them. So many things that we can look into, but as what Marian has said, it's all about looking at our own backgrounds and reflecting on our current practices and making that small step. It doesn't have to be something that's
earth-shaking. It can be as simple as just reflecting on what you're doing in your own classroom and what ideas you are perpetuating with your students. So, yun po. So we don't get overwhelmed. We just think of what we can do now and how we can move forward. So thank you po.
Thanks, Ria. Anyone else? Any other reaction? Francis, Andrew, or Ronnie? Francis, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank Nick and Marian for your reactions. I feel the love, and I think that I'm really happy that we're all here together with the rest of the participants. And just showing up, just being present here is a sign that that we have some kind of commitment to change things up, to resist coloniality, that we can that we probably have noticed in our own environments. That's why we're here, and I'm just happy that we're all here to learn. And I just want to add that, kasi a while ago, Ria was saying that I wish I knew this many years ago and like that. Me naman, when I took up the course again, with ACELT, actually, even if there were concepts that I was familiar with already from before, um, just hearing things again made me examine my own biases, na even if I've studied all of these things, parang I also realized na I also have some certain biases that have trickled in, that have been unnoticed, na ay, meron pala akong bias against some certain sounds or ganyan. Um, um, and it's good to always be updated with these things and with the field, so that we can also reflect on how we can be better language educators, whether in the classroom, or whether in the home, or maybe just as an example, kasi nga other people simply look up to the way we speak English and other languages. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francis. Philip, go ahead. You're raising. Sige.
Thank you, Cheche. So actually taking the seed course offered by ACELT really made me reflect on how I approach teaching, and it made me revisit my own practices. So I think all of us really, that was the effect of the seed course. And I think it was mentioned by Marian earlier that reflective teaching, because teaching is, it's a highly contextualized practice. So teachers should be reflective. Okay, a teacher should reflect, no, what are the needs of his or her students in the classroom, and to answer actually a question in advance, whether how to draw the line between a right way of teaching and the wrong way of teaching. To me, it's you, the teacher, who can answer that question, because you know the needs, you know the context of your students, so you reflect. If this approach does not work, then maybe you can change that approach, because maybe it's not aligned to their context, and you need to appropriate your instruction so that they can engage more in the classroom, especially now that our educational setup is remote, right? Talagang ako, in my experience, parang medyo nahihirapan ako to make students participate in my online class. So you make your instruction relatable to them, so that they can personally feel invested in learning, and that they will also engage in your classes. So yun po.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I think that's in response to one of the questions in the chat box. Kasi merong nagtanong, when we teach language, directed to you, Andrew, there is always a concept of right usage and wrong usage. How do we draw the line between wrong usage and local usage in teaching English? So I hope nasagot ni Andrew yung tanong na yan, Ms. Jazel Nebres. And then we have another, before I go to the next question, Ronnie, you might want to say something. Okay. Audio? Okay. All right,
Okay.
so
Hello.
go ahead.
Oh yeah, yeah, because I was barred from.
Okay, naka-unmute
Okay,
ka
so
kanina.
so I must so it's a semiotic way of saying, okay, I'll just listen. No, I mean it's I'm just so fascinated with the presentations and also the reactions. So I really just would like to thank everyone for your contributions. And I think the my role here is really just also to be part of the conversation and also to listen, because I think in the seed, and I think many of the participants in the project, in the program, know this. I mean, most all of them know this basically, that at the end of the day, it is the decision maker is the teacher. All right. So it's not the program that should impose its own lenses. It's not the lenses, the concepts that should be imposed on the teachers, because yun nga yung naging problema sa teacher training or sa teacher education. All right. But if we really try to just simply let the decision come from the teachers themselves and see how and where these concepts can actually be made use of in their respective classrooms. So I think that's a much more productive way of engaging in these things. Because if this is another one of those kinds of seminars again and workshops and says, okay, maganda ito, this is the latest. That's why at the start of this whole webinar, I said this is something fashionable. I'll use it and go to the classroom. Right. I think we talk about these because these are issues, but at the end of the day, we make we contest, we negotiate meanings from within our own classrooms as well. Now, I also say this because typically, all right, it is always the case when at the end of any presentation, experience ko to, and I'm sure experience din natin lahat, no? At the end of any presentation, ang tanong is, so what do you suggest that I do? All right. What are some of the steps? What are the concrete strategies? These may be very neutral and passive ways of asking questions, but actually, to me, this does not. I mean, in general, this does not promote critical reflection. All right. We are here to engage with these issues, but then I think, if you agree with these concepts, if we agree with these ways of thinking about, let's say, decoloniality and so on and so forth, then sa'yo na yon, given your own classrooms, given your own experiences, then how then can you engage in this? Kasi why should I be the one telling you, okay, so now step 1 do this, step 2 do this, step 3 do this? All right. I understand, because we are all very busy, and somehow I also would like to see how concrete things happen. And that's the reason why I was fascinated with the presentations of everyone, precisely because it's really a combination of like thinking about the issue and then how do I go about this now in the classroom. All right. So I think this is how, I mean, moving forward, I think this is how we should really engage with, the most recent, the most fashionable, things in the world, in our field, by taking ownership. I think Nick and Marian also did mention that they're taking ownership over what needs to be done in the classroom. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ruani. Just to inform everyone, we have, well, it's almost 5 p.m. and I think we have time for one question from the audience. And among the many questions, I think I'd like to ask this one. Ang question niya is, what are your thoughts about DepEd stating that the poor English teaching skills of the teachers were one of the reasons why students have a shallow understanding of their lessons in science? Any reaction?
I taught in Philippine Science High School, the main campus.
Yes.
And ang nakita ko doon is habang dumadaan ako sa corridor, I could see that my co-teachers, even if they were using foreign textbooks, would resort to explaining the concepts to the students in the local languages. Para lang sa Tagalog, kasi we were the main campus in Manila. So, I mean, they're very high level mathematics and sciences. So, the way to bridge the knowledge to the students was to explain it in what was familiar to the students. So, baka naman iba yung problema. Baka naman kasi pinipilit yung English. So, baka naman hindi yung problema is yung low level of English, and maybe we can reframe the way we think about teaching math and sciences. That's it. That's my
Okay, thanks, Francis,
thoughts
for
on
that.
that subject.
So, yun lang naman talaga yung key, di ba? To talk to the students in a language that they're familiar with. So, gamitin ang local languages. Yes, Ronnie?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's plain and simple. Mali in the first place yung pagtingin, yung pag-iisip. Kung ganun nga yung pag-iisip, you know, kaya nagkakaroon ng problema in the way we you know, draw up solutions, because we blame these, you know, superficial reasons. Kaya nga hindi naintindihan kasi nga pinipilit nga, sabi nga ni Francis. Kung if your main reason is get them to understand the concept, then pedagogically speaking, fundamentally speaking, in, you know, effective pedagogy, you use everything that you can to make them understand the concept.
Yes.
It's as simple as that. All right? Kung kailangan lang hand gestures, mag-hand gestures ka. Kung kailangan kang, kung sumayaw, mag-sumayaw ka. For as long as you actually get them to understand the concept. Ba't mo pipilitin yung isang ito to use this? Hindi nga effective eh. All right? So this is exactly the reason why we are doing and talking about these things, you know, because we need to get to the sources of these ideas and ideologies. And as what we all have been saying, you know, hindi to strategy lang. These are all like historically framed for us.
And I think that also addresses the concern of Dr. Gulam Ali Burino or Burio in the chat box. And kasi ang question na is, do you consider the use of L1 in an ELT classroom facilitative or debilitating? So, nasagot na dun sa comment and reactions kanina ng mga speakers. Anything else? Well, it's almost 5. I think that's all the time we have. But I hope you remember that, well, before I move on to the next part of the activity, please allow me, together with the rest of our panel discussants, allow me also to recognize or acknowledge the presence of the following participants meron tayo from Pakistan, from Tarlac, from Nueva Ecija, General Santos City, Auckland, New Zealand, from World City College Gimba Campus, from Zamboanga, Cerriles State College, Mati, Zamboanga del Sur, from Antipolo City, San Isidro Elementary School, San Juan National High School, Antipolo City, World City College Gimba, Nueva Ecija, Marikina Polytechnic College, Tubli National High School, Catanduanes, and Divine World College of Vegan Senior High School Department. Thank you all. Yung mga hindi namin na-mention, we don't have all the time now, but we appreciate your coming here. And thank you so much, Marian, Nick, Ria, Andrew, Frances, and Ronnie for joining us. Pero meron tayong promise sa ating mga participants today, and we said in our announcement that we're going to play a game. So meron tayong game, and our prizes include an ACELT Forum 2020 issue, Teachers Club membership, and then a discount to the registration fee of our 55th ACELT conference. Please stay lang muna kayo dyan kasi maganda yung mga prizes natin, and may photo op syempre mamaya. So, wag munang aalis, wag bibitiw. So, ito, to those who are not familiar with Kahoot, you may need a separate gadget to join. So, go to kahoot.com and key in the code that you will see. I will flash later. And then you will click, kung pwede nating i-send yung link to the chat box na kahoot.com, please click that. To join, please use your first name so that we know and we make sure that we award the prizes to the right persons. And to those who are not familiar, the questions will appear here on my screen. And then the answers that, the possible answers that you can choose from will appear in your gadget. So dun kayo titingin. And we have 5 questions. Right, so tingnan natin. Are you ready? So, hang on a minute. Okay. Ito na. Sige. Yan ang ating code. If you can join us, we're waiting for players. There are almost 300 people in the room. Siguro we can wait for about the first 50 or 100. Yan, madami. Wow, ang dami. Galing, parang sanay na sanay kayo mag-Kahoot ah. Okay, o sige. So, pasensya na dun sa mga hindi makakasali ha. I'll start now. So this is about ACELT diaries and TSI. All right, so the correct answer is every Monday, mapapanood nyo ang bagong episode ng ACELT Diaries. Every Monday at 6 p.m. So meron na naman, please pakiabangan ninyo si Miss Devi and Miss Angel sa Mondays, dito sa coming Monday. So we all have to remember that it's not just about getting the right answer sa Kahoot, it's also a speed of game. So ang pinakamabilis to get the right answer is Charlene. Okay, so ilan kaya ang makukuhang correct answers ni Charlene? Let's have the next one. Yes, mapapanood natin ang ACELT Diaries on our YouTube channel and Facebook. Sino ngayon? Yes. Charlene pa rin. Ang galing naman ni Charlene. Nagbasa to ng guidelines. Talagang nanood ng nag-subscribe sa ACELT Diaries. Next. True or false? Daming sumasagot. Yes. Some more. Yes. So ACELT Diaries is a weekly YouTube show that talks about current issues and trends in ELT in the Philippines. Sinong nanalo this time? Naku, umakyat na. Si Nick, lumalaban si Nick. Nandyan na sa board. Tapos si Bettina. And then Stella, Steph, and si Charlene pa rin namumuna. Okay, next. TSI is for educators, researchers, and scholars from all over the globe. That's the Sociolinguist Inquirer. True or false? Galing naman. Yes, that's true. So subscribe na po kayo sa TSI, the Sociolinguist Inquirer. It's for everyone in the room. Okay, next. Sino na naman? Okay, si Rhea, Bettina, Charlene, Stella, and Steph. Naunahan na niya si Charlene. Let's have the last question. Grabe, ang dami ng sagot. True. So please join us on November 11, 12, 13 as we celebrate the 40th founding anniversary of ACELT at the 55th ACELT Conference Workshop. So, who got the first place? Meron tayong top 3. Sila yung makakakuha ng prizes. So congratulations, Stella, Charlene, and Steph. Let's give them a round of applause. Salamat. Thank you for joining. And for the first prize, I think you will get 2 different prizes. So ang first prize natin will get a conference discount of 500 pesos and a copy of the 2020 ACELT Forum. Okay? Ang second prize natin will get the Teachers Club membership fee, annual fee, worth 500 pesos. And yung third prize natin will get a copy of the ACELT Forum 2020. And with that, I'd like to invite everyone to the 55th ACELT Conference Workshop on November 11 to 13, 2021. So next month na yan. And because you are here today, we will give you a free copy of the ACELT Forum 2020 if you register and pay for the conference fees on or before October 30, 2021. So free copy of the ACELT Forum 2020 if you register and pay the conference fees on or before October 30, 2021. Here are the conference fees. So that's it. And finally,